Hello, and welcome back to How I Mother. Today's episode is How I Discipline My Children, Part 2. So, if you haven't listened to Part 1, go back and listen to that first. I used Part 1 to kind of talk about before discipline, we have to think about what causes the misbehaviors that force us to use discipline, if that makes sense. So whether they're overtired, over hungry, we haven't set the boundary firm enough, those kinds of things, we need to kind of examine those things first. Today, I'm going to talk about how I actually discipline my children. I know that this is a very complex topic. Obviously, it varies based on the age of the kid, any special needs that the child might have. I am just going to speak to my experience of having kids 7.5 and younger. And I know above that, it probably looks a lot different. And I'm sure that maybe we do some different things even with kids of similar ages. But I'm going to go ahead and tell you what we do. So the first thing that I think about with discipline is I try my hardest to use discipline as teaching and to come from a place of love and honestly coaching and teaching my children. Now, of course, I have flipped out on my kids. I've yelled, I've screamed, I've stomped away, I've cried. I've had plenty of those moments in 7.5 years. But when I'm in a good headspace and when I am disciplining the way that I want to, that's how I approach it. Not yelling and screaming, but getting on their level and disciplining through teaching and coaching and loving to hopefully change that behavior in the future. So that's the first piece of it. Now, I want to start with younger kids. So with kids who don't really understand consequences, like say a timeout or taking something away, I think the easiest, most practical form of discipline is redirection. There aren't very many things in parenting that I say, I never do this, I don't agree with this, but I'm going to say the one thing that I do not agree with in parenting is spanking or hitting. And maybe you have a different take on it. That's your opinion as a parent. That's okay. But I feel pretty strongly about that. And Greg and I are on the same page as far as that goes. We have never spanked our children, never hit our children, and don't plan to do that. If you really look at the research behind spanking, it's not super positive and often doesn't have the outcomes that we want to. And I understand. There are moments where I have come to the absolute brink of my patience, and I can totally understand why that happens sometimes. And I get it. I really can understand if you have tried everything, you're frustrated, they're frustrated, everybody's just at their peak level. I get it, but that's one pretty firm standard that I have is no spanking. So again, for the younger kids, I never spanked my kids that were little like that. I would try to redirect them. So if they're pulling on a computer cord or taking things out of a cabinet that I didn't want them to, they're not really going to understand if you continue doing this, then this is going to happen. I redirect them and get them set up with something else. Or I realize that I need to stop what I'm doing and give them the attention that they need in that moment. I think that that's a pretty small phase of their lives in the grand scheme of things, maybe 12 to 18 months, where they don't really understand consequences totally. So I think that's the first stage of it. The second stage, I would say, is kind of, like the young toddler up until probably like school age. I think is kind of another category where they understand basic consequences, but it's not always super easy to reason with them. Like my older kids who are 5.5 and 7.5, it's very easy now for me to reason with them about why they can't do something, why something is dangerous, why this was not appropriate. We can have full conversations like that. But I would say from about 18 months, obviously, until probably about 4 years old, 4.5 years old, there's not a ton of rationalization going on. You can't reason with them all the time. A little bit, of course, but not to the degree that you can as the kids get older. So my technique for disciplining is to keep it at that young age, the toddler age, is to keep it very simple. Very few words, very clear boundaries, and then consistent action that backs up whatever you're saying you're going to do. So an example is, so my daughter Maya she'll be 3 in September. So she just turned 2.5. So if she wants to go outside, but she doesn't want to put shoes on, I don't get into a big back and forth with her. I say, Maya, if you would like to go outside, you need to put shoes on your feet. And if she says, no, I don't want to put shoes on my feet, I say it maybe one more time clearly. If you want to go outside, you need to put shoes on. If you want mommy to help you, I'll help you put shoes on your feet. And then I kind of leave it up to her. She can't go outside by herself because we have locks on the doors because she's a runner. And if she chooses to put shoes on, then she can go outside. I'm happy to help her do that. And if she doesn't and she throws a fit, I try to stay very calm, and I just either keep repeating the same thing or I have to move to another level of whatever the discipline is at that time. So if she chooses not to put them on, I'll just say, okay, well, we'll stay inside until you're ready to put your shoes on. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that causes a meltdown. I'm not going to go too much into temper tantrums and meltdowns today. I'm going to do that as a whole separate podcast episode. So it can go, I guess, one of 3 ways in that situation. Either she puts her shoes on and goes outside, which is fine, or she doesn't put her shoes on and she stays inside and hangs out, which is also fine. Or number 3, she doesn't put her shoes on, doesn't want me to help her, flips out, and then we're into the temper tantrum. So that's kind of what I do, though. There's no back and forth. There's no super emotional, this yelling and screaming and all that kind of stuff. It's just, this is what you need to do if you want to go outside, that kind of thing. I know the trickier situations are situations where you don't have a choice in that moment. Like in that situation, she has the choice. It's not that big of a deal if she goes inside or goes outside or stays inside. But say you have to get in the car to get to an appointment. You don't have time to sit there and give 3 choices or give plenty of time for someone to put their shoes on. You got to go, and you have a deadline, and you need to be in the car, and you're probably carrying a lot of things, sweating, running out the door. Again, make sure that you've left yourself enough time so that you have the time to be patient and to work with them and teach them through that moment. But it comes down to, now it's time to put your shoes on and we need to go. So in that age category, I would say, again, like that 18 months to, 3.5, maybe 4, the technique that I usually use is to give 2 choices. And I would say, I need you to put your shoes on. Either you can put them on or I will put them on for you. And if they say, no, I don't want to put my shoes on, I would maybe try one more time and say, I'm going to give you one more chance because we need to leave. You can put your shoes on by yourself, or mommy can help you put your shoes on. And then if they choose not to put their shoes on, then I do it. And I know that that doesn't always go smoothly. I know that that can be, that can cause an issue. The kid can be squirming away, things like that. In that case, I might just pick them up and pick their shoes up and carry them to the car. But I would also say something like, mommy gave you the choice and you chose not to put your shoes on, so now I'm going to help you do that. And I really try to take all emotion out of it. They're not trying to tick you off in that moment. They're not trying to make you late for your appointment. I don't always know what the reason is. I think a huge part of it is kids don't have a lot of opportunities to be in control. And so everybody likes that feeling. Everybody likes to have some autonomy over what's happening. And kids are people too. They might be grumpy. They might feel a certain way that day. They might want to be in control of a situation. There are lots of reasons that we as adults have bad days and that they have bad days, or reasons that we act out and reasons that they act out. And we have to respect that and just use it as a teachable moment. And again, if that leads to a temper tantrum, we can talk about that in another episode. But once they're calm and you have now sweated through forcing them into the car and maybe listening to them scream all the way to the doctor, they will eventually calm down. And then the next time that you do it, you can say, remember, I'm going to give you these choices. You can either put your shoes on by yourself and walk to the car, or mommy can do it for you. And then they'll remember that past episode, hopefully, and not want to relive that. I went through a lot of these situations with my middle daughter, Riley, who is extremely emotional. She's so sweet and so smart and empathetic and kind, but her emotions run super high. And one thing I learned through parenting her so far is that the calmer that I stay, the less elevated that she gets. When I start yelling or raising my voice or getting annoyed, when she can sense that, everything escalates times 10. So when I can be concise, short, direct, set the boundary and follow through, even if it ends in a temper tantrum that day, it's better down the road. I hope that that makes sense. So that's kind of what I would say, that middle age bracket. Again, I can only speak to 7.5 and younger, but that's what I feel for that age group. The next age group I would say is maybe like 4.5 to what I know as 7 so far. I don't know how much longer these kinds of consequences and discipline will work for my oldest, but so far he and Riley seem to be about the same as far as what works for discipline. So the first thing I want to be really clear that I have learned is setting whatever boundary it is that you want them to follow, make it clear and make it known what will happen if they break that boundary. The trouble that I have is consistency. And I think that that's one of the hardest parts of disciplining is you have to be consistent with it. If you threaten and then threaten a consequence and then follow through with it one time, but then not the next time, that's confusing to them. And of course, they're going to try to take advantage of that because they're kids and they're smart and they want what they want. So they're going to be confused by that, which is then going to cause a frustrating situation for everybody. So I have to be better about that. Sometimes I am not great about that if I take away specifically screen time, because they beg for it, they want it, they feel like they've earned it back. And then sometimes I feel like I kind of give in, even though I've taken that away. And then that's just not good, because then they don't always take you seriously. So that's something that I really have to work on, but I have gotten better about that as the years have gone on. At first, it was really difficult for me to see my son when he was little. It was hard for me to see him upset, and it's still hard. It's hard to see your kids upset or disappointed or mad at you or mad at themselves for a choice that they made, but part of that comes with learning, and I will just be honest with my kids and say, as your mom, part of my job is to teach you how to do X, or to teach you how to be a kind friend or a nice sibling, or to be honest, or to follow directions, and you didn't do that this time. And I think sometimes when you have those honest conversations with that little bit of older kids, I think that really goes a long way. So for the consequences that I have for my older kids, I try my best to connect the consequence directly to the behavior. Some of those are just natural consequences, like I told you not to throw that, and then you threw it and you broke it, so now your toy is broken. That's kind of just a natural consequence. I don't believe that every single thing that kids do all day needs this major form of discipline. They don't need to be taught a lesson every 5 minutes about every little thing that they're doing. Sometimes it can be a natural consequence like that. Sometimes it can just be a talking to, like, come over here for a second. And you get down on their level and look in their eyes and say, I'm really frustrated by this, or I'm not sure why you did this. I know that you can do better. Maybe you give a warning of, if you continue to do this, then here's the consequence that's going to happen, something like that. But, give them a little room, I think, to make a mistake, see your reaction, talk it through with them. And then if it requires some sort of disciplinary action from there, then you've given them plenty of forewarning, basically. So I try to connect the action, the discipline action, to whatever misbehavior they did. So if they, I don't know, left trash out in the backyard, I might just, the consequence, the disciplinary action or whatever, is to go clean it up. If they have hurt their sibling, which again, I'll talk about siblings in a separate episode, but usually I give everybody a chance to cool off, and then they have to come and have a talk with their sibling to make it right. If Maya throws food on the floor, I make her get down and clean up the floor of whatever she made the mess of. As kids get older, if they break things, I make them contribute money to replacing it if it's something that our family needs and wants. So I try to connect it to whatever the misbehavior is, but I also try to keep it reasonable. If it's a bigger issue that is not going to be able to be fixed by a child, or if it's just something that requires a conversation instead of some sort of discipline, then, that just is what it is for that specific case. And I think that's what's so hard about discipline, is there's no hard, fast rule to it. You kind of have to learn as a parent what works with your kid and what situations require more from you or more direction. With this age group also, I would say you still have to keep emotion out of it, which I think is difficult. I think that's difficult at all ages, because it's easy to get frustrated with whatever the situation is. It's easy to feel emotional about the issue, but again, I've noticed that the more that I can keep my emotions out of it, the better the whole situation is. If we can just have a rational conversation, follow through on whatever discipline action is required without emotion. Another thing that I heard recently that really resonated with me, and I'm still working on this. I really liked this. It was about not connecting your feelings to the child's behavior. Like, it makes mommy really sad when you do X. And I was reading how that's not the best because it teaches kids that their actions have a direct impact on your emotions. Like, I'm not in control of my own emotions. My child is in control of my emotions, good and bad. And so I've been trying to reword that a little bit with my kids. Like, I might say, I'm feeling frustrated right now, or I don't like it when you do this, but I try not to make it good, positive or negative. I try not to make it that whatever you're doing, child, is having some emotional impact on me, because I, as the mother, am responsible for my own emotions. And even if you're doing a frustrating behavior, that I am still in control of my emotions and I don't have to be frustrated too, if that makes sense. I'm still learning more about that. So try to keep emotion out of it. Be straight to the point. It's okay to share your feelings, I think, but don't get so worked up and emotional that you lose the purpose of why you're disciplining them or how you're getting them to do the desired behavior. Another thing that I've noticed, especially with my oldest, is I try not to get into a big conversation about whatever the problem is. So I say my piece. I say, I already warned you about this. I told you what the consequence is. You chose not to follow the directions. So now here is your consequence. And I'll try to give some examples as I think of them. The biggest issue that we have with my oldest is sneaking, like the iPad or the Switch or screen time or something like that. And we have pretty set rules about screen time that my husband and I both think are very fair. Right now, they're getting an hour of screen time a day, and then they get even more than that on the weekends. Oftentimes, we watch family movies. Sometimes I let them watch an educational show during lunch. They have plenty of opportunities to watch screen time. So we've set the boundary that, like in the morning, if my son is the first one to wake up, that he's not to get the iPad, he's not to turn on a television. He can read, he can play, he can color, he can do whatever he wants until everybody else is awake. And we've set that boundary and we've spoken about the consequence. And recently, that's been an issue that we've had where we'll wake up and realize that he has in fact snuck the iPad and is watching it. And the consequence for him is that then he loses his 1 hour of screen time that following day. So that's actually where we are today, unfortunately. But as hard as it is to follow through with some of those things, I think that's what we really need to do, to say that this is what we said. We don't sneak things. We don't lie. We don't hide things, and you intentionally broke a rule and a boundary that you knew was there. And because of that, there are consequences. And that's just life, right? I mean, that can be when you're older and you're speeding on a highway, the consequences, you can get a speeding ticket. Maybe you don't get caught every time, but if you do, you get a consequence for that behavior. So I think it's a good life lesson, as hard as it is for everybody involved, I guess. I'll just start to wrap up, but I think for the older kids too, the biggest thing that I have found is taking privileges away. And I don't always love to do that, but as kids get older, I can talk a little bit about timeouts. I'm not a huge fan of timeouts, but especially as they get older, I don't really think that timeouts in the conventional way work to change a child's behavior in that situation, at least going forward. It can stop it in that moment, but I have found that as my kids get older, taking away privileges is really what helps. So if you don't, you have the responsibility to clean up your room. If you're not able to clean up your room, then you're not going to be able to come to the park with us at 11 o'clock. You've lost the privilege of coming to the park. Or if you sneak the iPad, you've lost your privilege of screen time. Things like that, where it can kind of connect to you have a responsibility. And if you choose not to follow through with that responsibility, I'm going to take this privilege away. Because in my eyes, things like going on trips, going on outings, watching screen time, playing video games, those are privileges. And if you can't follow through on your responsibilities, you don't get those privileges. Again, the hardest part for me is the follow through. I'm great at having conversations with my kids and having these good teachable moments, but I'm not as good at following through on the consequence of that. But I'm sticking to the no screen time today, trying my best with that. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was timeouts, because I think that can be kind of in various age groups. And I know that that's kind of the go-to for everybody. And I've used that. I still do use it sometimes for Maya. But I don't know how I completely feel about timeouts. The thing that I don't like about them is, number one, a kid has made a mistake, and so you're putting them by themselves, even if they're upset. Maybe they don't fully understand. And even if they do understand, I don't know that isolation like that is always the best thing, especially without any kind of follow-up conversation or understanding of what they did. I also I don't feel like a timeout is super connected to the behavior. So I really use timeouts, so to speak. I call them breaks. Like, I will say if Riley, and I'll talk more about this with temper tantrums, but if she's really frustrated and has thrown something, or maybe she has hit her sibling, or she's stomping her feet or something like that, I might say, I want you to go to your room and take a break. And when you're calm and when you're ready to have a conversation with me, then you can come back downstairs. So it's not this timeout where she's being punished and she has to go up there, until I let her out. It's more just teaching her sometimes you have to remove yourself from the situation, calm down, and then come back with a little bit more of a rational mindset, and then you can work through whatever the problem is. With Maya, if I'm being completely honest, I use timeouts when I need a minute to calm myself down. So if she dumps a cup of water on the floor and it's 5:45 or 6 o'clock at night and it's been a long day and I'm tired and my patience is thin, I will just say, Maya, you need to go upstairs and take a break. And at her age, at 2.5, I carry her upstairs and I put her in her room and I say, I want you to take a break in your room for a little while. And when I say a little while, I mean 2 or 3 minutes. But then I always tell her when I come back, I've started, as she's gotten older, asking her, why are you in timeout? And she'll say, I put water on the floor. And then we can have an age-appropriate conversation. Is that what we do with water? No, that's not nice. Mommy has to clean up that water. I want you to come downstairs and help me clean the water up. And then we go downstairs and clean it up together. So I really try not to use timeouts. Like, I think in that situation, if I could have remained calm and my patience were at its top level, I probably just would have calmly said, we don't put water on the floor, and now I can see that you can't use a big girl cup. I want you to get a towel and help me clean up the water. And we could have just avoided the timeout altogether. Like, what's really the point of the timeout in that situation? To shame them? I don't know. I just don't know how I feel totally about timeouts. For me, they're more for me to have a timeout so that I can stay calm and collected. But I try to just stop take a deep breath, take my emotion out of it, and do what Maya just did that the other day. She took her cup of water and dumped it onto her plate, which ruined half of her food. And instead of putting her in timeout, I just cleaned up the plate. I took her cup away and I said, "Oh, I guess you'll have to use a sippy cup. You won't be able to use a big girl cup anymore." And then I gave her a sippy cup and she started to throw a fit. And I said, "Oh, we'll try again another dinner time because today you showed me that you can't use this big girl cup." And I gave her a towel and she cleaned up what had spilled on the top of the table. It didn't get on the floor. But to me, that was connected. It didn't really require a timeout. There wasn't really a reason for a timeout at that point. So anyways, that is how I discipline my kids. I tried to go from little kids to toddlers to school-aged kids with how I discipline. I hope that that made sense and gave some good ideas. I would love to hear your ideas too, because I know that disciplining is hard. It's one of the hardest things. It's hard to take emotion out. It's hard to have patience all day, every day with your kids. It's just a hard topic to, say, this is how you should do it. Follow these 4 steps. It just doesn't work like that. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this episode and I will see you for the next one. See you later.